Hello Patreon supporters. Today we're going to be looking at a ZBrush sketch of a troll character. This particular character is based on a sketch that I did for a Gnomon Art of the Month contest. I particularly like the idea of Norwegian trolls with the big nose that get turned to stone in sunlight. So let me preface this by saying that even though I'm using ZBrush, I'm not by any means a professional ZBrush user, and I'm still working through my workflow process. So keep that in mind with this. Nothing I do or say is set in stone. I'm just doing what works best for me, and I fully expect that to change later. As you can see, I'm using a Dynamesh Z-sphere to start off with. With this process, I was originally intending to do this as a bust, just a head form. So as you can see, I'm sculpting just the head, and I'm just trying to block in loose forms. I want to get where the eyes are going to be. Obviously the nose is going to be a defining characteristic since he is a troll. And I'm trying to just sort out how I want everything to fit together. In my original sketch, I had the nose kind of become the upper lip, but I'm trying to keep them as two distinct entities. So I always like to throw in my eyeballs really early in the game because I think it's important to sort of establish how they're going to situate inside the head. As you can see, I scaled the eyes down because I want them to appear more beady. And right now I'm just sort of figuring out the basic forms, the eyes, the nostrils, where the nose is going to fit in. In my original sketch, I had the nostrils on top of the nose because I wanted the nose to be, like I said, part of the upper lip. But I'm trying to make it a distinct nose here. At this point, this character is starting to look a little bit goblin-y, in my humble opinion. Just so you know, I do record this audio after the sketch, so I apologize because I'm switching verb tenses a lot, but I already sculpted this, and I know where it's going, but I'm trying to describe it in the moment, so I apologize for any verb tense issues. I thought, oh, it'd be funny if he had droopy ears, because usually I'd like to sculpt, my sort of default ear is an ear that goes way back in the head, and looks almost like elf ears, and I was trying to get away from that a little bit, so I sculpted them droopy here. And now I'm just trying to build the neck, build up the forms. As you can see, it's getting a little crunchy looking, so I'm just going to smooth that out before I Dynamesh it again. Now he's starting to have some character. I'm starting to see the forms that I want. But in my humble opinion, he still looks a little too goblin-y and less troll-like. I'm just Dynameshing to get rid of any crunchiness that I have, and then also to get rid of any material issues where like it's got gaps in it and stuff like that. So I Dynamesh it so it takes care of that and it puts it into one solid piece. Now I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want the head to be. I want the neck to go back a little bit more, and sometimes it's just easier to do that with the move brush. It's around this time that I realized that this is not just going to be a bust. So I start to build out some of the forms like the shoulders. And I'm thinking at this point that like I'm just going to be able to stretch everything and make it into the body form, which is one methodology, and it certainly works. But I found that, for me at least, with the topology and getting groups in the actual mesh, it's easier to do this with Z-sphere. So right now I'm trying to still pull everything into a body shape, and I think it's right about this point where I'm like, ugh, this is an exercise in futility. And I want to get rid of, I decided to get rid of the long ears. Because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to sculpt underneath them. And so at this point I'm figuring I'm going to bring in some Z-spheres, and I'll just create some Z-sphere ears. And it was right about here that my computer crashed and I lost all of my footage of making Z-spheres. So I apologize, but it was just a standard process where I created a Z-sphere armature, and then did an adaptive skin to get a skin that I could work with. So I merged down the head sculpt that I'd already had into the Z-Sphere adaptive skin sculpt that I had. So I've created one large mesh where the face is included with the original bust sculpture that I did. And you can see where it cut off and it's kind of goofy looking. So right now I'm just working that adaptive skin. It is a Dynamesh product, but it still has the low polys of the adaptive skin. But since I know that I'm going to be working over those with the, at this point I'm just using the clay buildup tool, clay brush. And that clay buildup brush is going to obliterate most of those poly looking shapes. At this point I am primarily using the clay buildup brush. It's one of my favorite brushes for doing my block-in of the sculpture. This is where my previous teacher had always complained that I sculpt a little bit too sculpturally. You can tell that I'm a traditional sculptor because I am treating the clay buildup brush like I'm just slapping down clay and getting rough forms. I know that after I Z-remesh this that I'm going to be able to smooth a lot of the blobbiness out of it, so I'm not worrying about that too much. Now here I'm trying to put back in those ears. I ended up not using the Z-spheres, so instead of doing Z-spheres, what I'm doing is I'm just inserting a sphere and then trying to just scale it into the rough ear shape. And what this will do for me versus just pulling out the shape is that it's going to create just a separate group. I'm just trying to cheat the groups. And you can see there when I turn on the polys, the frames, you can see that it is a different group set. At this point I'm using my dog's ears as a point of reference. He's got floppy ears, he's part hound dog, so I sort of want a goofy look about him. And you can see when I pivot towards the front that I did end up moving the eyes a bit closer, again to take it away from that sort of goblinly look that we had before where I had the eyes wider set. I also made his nose a little bit bigger because to me the defining characteristic of a Norwegian type troll is that they have these big schnozzes. And right now I'm just trying to figure out the anatomy of the back and neck. I want him to be a big fella, so I'm trying to sculpt in a little bit of a gut, but I also want it to read as being maybe a little bit muscular. So I'm trying to figure out how far I want to push that. And for me, like, in general, when I sculpt, I don't always have like a set idea of where I'm going. I sort of just play with the forms and see what feels right. So you can see that I'm pushing and pulling it. I'm trying to figure out like how far do I want to push it? How far do I want to, you know, do I want him to be really big or do I want it like here I'm trying to figure out do I want to have like folds on his back? I'm trying to figure out how to blend them off and still indicate that he is a strong character, but maybe not a svelte character. Right now I'm just goofing around with the tail. I'm going to really clean this up after I remesh it. But right now I'm just trying to smooth it out so it doesn't look quite so chunky. The chunkiness is left over from the Z-spheres. I basically broke the tail down into a few different joints just to get that little curvature, but I want to smooth that out a little bit more to have it look like almost like a prehensile tail. I like the idea of trolls with long tails. I did make the material here a little bit more reflective, and that's just so I can see how it's the light's bouncing off of it. It's not how I intend to leave it. If I do end up bringing this to like a skin sort of texture, then I'm going to have to have a little bit softer look to it. Right now I'm just screwing around with the mouth. I'm trying to create a mouth bag, and I'm doing it a little bit backwards. So right now I inserted an inverted sphere to create a gap, and it didn't work. I just did it again, but scaled it a little bit smaller, and it seemed to work a little bit better now. And this is just in case I decide to put in like teeth or a tongue later. I just wanted to have a little bit of separation in the mouth. Again, I'm by no means a professional about this. I'm trying to do the best I can, and I have a feeling that sometimes the way I do things it's a little, like I said, backwards. I want him to have this wide-ish mouth. At this point, he's almost looking a little bit like a decompressed blobfish. And I sort of like where that's going. The nose has got to be bigger. I keep on pushing the nose. I want to see how far I can push it. And I want these little tiny eyes. So I want them to be a little bit smaller, so I'm just scaling them smaller. And coloring them in so that I can see how they are reading. I use the toy plastic material for the eyes just because it gives it a nice reflective shine off the light source. And then I believe it's Skin Shader 4 for the, or no, wait, I'm sorry, this is Basic Material 1. But eventually I will change it to Skin Shader 4. And right now I'm just using the masking tool to try and create some eyelids. I'm trying to keep my Dynamesh polys down. I believe at this point I'm only at like 2 million. I don't want it to become too unwieldy. My computer's getting older. It's about 5 or 6 years old now. And I'm definitely feeling the limitations of it, and it does crash periodically, which is unfortunately how I lost the data from the earlier footage. I tend to get a little fixated on the eyes, so right now I'm just trying to rough them in and try not to get too focused on them, but as you can see I get a little hyper-focused on them. Working on those big old nostrils. I'm just figuring out how that nose anatomy is going to work out. I know that if I let myself, I'll get a little bit too hung up on the face, so I'm trying to push myself to work out the rest of the body, because at this point he's still got polys all over his arms and legs. If I'm being completely honest, I'm probably avoiding doing those because I love working on faces. That's why I make so many masks, but I am not too crazy about especially leg anatomy and the lower arm anatomy. Just trying to add a little bit of extra anatomy inside the ear. Not that you'll see it, but I know it's there. And figuring out what I want for his neck and chest. I'm just playing around here. I'm just trying to figure out, like do I want his collarbone showing? I decided at this point that I kind of wanted him to have a little bit of a waddle, like a turkey. Again, just figuring out those muscles, how they all fit together. For me, sculpting is a very organic process. I use the Z-spheres to kind of rough things out and get, like I said, like an armature, but I'm not really using it to stick to anatomy too much. So I'm moving things around a lot. I want them to have a little bit of a belly overhang. Figuring out those pectorals and how they sit in. I always tend to overemphasize the deltoids, the shoulder muscle, and I think you can see that happening here. And my pecs were getting a little too low. I believe at one point, I don't know if it's right around here, I was considering adding extra breasts, essentially. Like maybe he'd be like more like a dog where you'd have like a few. I ended up not going that direction. But sometimes for me, like I said, it's just playing around with it and seeing how it looks, and then either deciding to go with it or not deciding to go with it. At this point, I'm just using the clay build-up tool. That's primarily what I'm using. It doesn't have an alpha on it. I just use it without an alpha to get sort of a softer mark. In the very beginning of this video, I was using it with the square alpha, but I usually kick that off right away because I think it's a little bit too harsh. And then I'm just using the damp standard to sort of establish where I want lines to be. At this point, his arms were really big, and I thought that, maybe they're just a touch too big. I want him to have bigger arms than legs, because I want it to be like he could grab things. Maybe isn't all that fast. And so I scaled the arms down a little bit, just because they were oversized, like comically big. And I think that I still want this to read as a feasible creature. We'll see about that. At this point, I'm breaking out the trim dynamic tool, which I use like a traditional rake tool when I'm sculpting with clay. So between the clay buildup and the trim dynamic tool, it's just slapping clay down and scraping it back. You can see that I tend to have sort of that traditional look because of the methodology that I use. And this is just based on my background with clay. Bringing in the damp standard again just to block out the muscle groups and try to figure out how things fit together. This will all get smoothed down. You can see that I'm starting to take away some of the stuff. Building the trapezius and the latissimus dorsi. It's the broadest muscle in the back. And then the shoulder muscles kind of dip underneath the latissimus dorsi. Building in the scapula there. Normally, if a person's got a lower body fat percentage, you can kind of see the bone of the scapula sticking out. But this guy, I do want him to be a bit thicker, so I'm putting it in there for my point of reference, but I intend to sculpt over it eventually. And sometimes that's just how I have to work. I have to like build up the muscle groups just to see where they are, and then add flesh or looseness on top of it. Here's his waddle starting to take shape. I'm trying to figure out if I really want the collarbone to show in the sculpture. Again, though, I'm blocking in some of the muscle groups. The deltoid sort of kind of attached to the collarbone, and I wanted to have it like laid in there to see how it fits together. And I will say that this is not anatomically accurate. I'm just really loosely blocking it in and trying to get a feel for it. I want to add some bone structure. Again, I'm sort of treating myself. If I could sculpt on the body for a little bit of time, I treat myself by then allowing myself to sculpt on the face. So otherwise I'll take the face to completion and then he'll still have like a Play-Doh body. Okay, I'm trying to use my damp standard tool to create an edge to the eyelid, but I don't really have enough topology here to do it. So I'm pushing through it, but in reality I should just wait till I remesh everything. Just adding some wrinkles in. They're going to get blocked out, but I just sort of need to see how they look. He's got such a big schnoz, I want to make sure that anatomy's there. Now, one thing about trolls is that traditionally in mythology they do eat people, so while I do want this guy kind of dopey looking, I still want him to have the hallmarks of a predator, so I want him to have strong jaws, strong muscles leading up to his head, that he could take a chunk out of something should he be in a position to. He is still a predator. And just adding in some of these muscle groups, figuring out again how they all fit together. This is way too what's the word I'm looking for? Stratified right now. I don't really want it to look this muscly in the final thing, but sometimes just using the clay build-up tool tends to create those muscly looks. I will obliterate that once we get to the remeshing. I'm just trying to figure out how I want the legs to be working right now. That I will admit that at this point the legs are really blobby and they're not where I want them to be, and my knowledge of anatomy of the legs is not that great. I definitely need to put some hours in on practice there. So I'm trying to just play around with it and figure out how I want things to sit together. I want him to have muscles on his legs because he's obviously a pretty big character, and if he's hauling, his bulk around, his legs would be very muscular. But I also kind of want them to be skinny because I want them to not take away from his upper body. I want his upper body to be more threatening. Again, like his upper body is like the predatory part where he could grab humans and break their bones and eat them, but only if he can catch up to you. So this is I'm a little embarrassed about this. This is really blobby right now, and I just moving things around. I don't really know exactly how I want the legs to be bent, and so I'm just trying to block in some anatomy and trying to figure out like how is this going to work. And it's just getting messier and messier. So I would say that especially in this part, this is not working out really well. I just switched to the move tool because it's so blobby that instead of trying to build up and take it down, I'm just going to move things around. So I don't really like the way that the legs are positioned right now because they're too square under his body. And if he's having to hoist that bulk around, if he had his legs this close together, I think it would create a sense of unbalance. He's not going to be able to... it would be very easy to knock him over, essentially, just because he does have his tail as a counterweight, but the legs just aren't quite working. So I'm trying to get the knees a little bit wider apart. And I'm just masking off whatever I'm not doing, and then using the gizmo to change where things are located. Now, the gizmo is a pretty powerful tool. When I first started with Zbrush, I was very reluctant to use it because it seemed too complicated to me. But I'm glad I kind of stuck with it and figured it out. It's actually not that difficult to use, it just, my brain doesn't quite comprehending it. So now I've arranged the legs to be a little bit more in the shape that I'm looking for so that his knees are tweaked outward, as are his feet. And I think that that's going to offer more support to his bulk. And again, I'm just struggling with trying to get the anatomy right in the legs. And for me, the thing is, just don't give up. Like, I get a little bit frustrated and sometimes I have to take some breaks. And I almost always have an anatomy book open next to me so that I can consult it and sort of figure out the muscle groups. I have the major ones memorized, but the way that especially the quads, like they tend to curve around the legs. It's sort of, I have to always look at reference to remember how it works. And there's no shame in looking at reference. So I'm trying to create some bony landmarks with the iliac crest because it does tend to poke out or create a dimple if you have a little bit more body fat on the surface. So I'm trying to create this gut sort of that's hanging down, but then I also want the iliac crest to be poking back into it. And then trying to figure out how the tail anatomy would work because theoretically your tail comes off of your tailbone, right? So where that exactly comes off is what I'm trying to work with here. So I'm building, again you can see the iliac crest there. This is way too sharp right now. And a lot of times, like I said, I try to really lay in the muscle areas a little bit. I overdo it and then I try to pull it back. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, do I want, because I'm also still working on my Dragar from the previous posts, and so I'm still trying to pull myself away from that anatomy, and that this character is very different. The Dragar is very emaciated and has his skin's barely clinging to him, not like this guy. So I started to throw in some of those Dragar forms, like how I like the skin to create these wrinkles, these fine wrinkles between the pecs and the stomach, and it's totally wrong for this character. So I pulled it out right away. Now I'm trying to figure out right here if I like the stomach to be bigger or thinner, and I opted for the bigger. You could do a screenshot if you hit Shift S, and it'll take a screenshot of your character, and then in this case, what I did is I just stepped backwards a bunch and then redid it and did a side by side. And the comparison didn't stick very long in the time lapse here, but it was a few minutes of just looking at it and trying to figure out which one I like better. I do find that sometimes doing the side by side videos or pictures just really helps me to see which one works better. I'm trying to figure out that waddle again, like how that musculature would work, how the skin would be sitting over. You have these sternomastoids, which is a muscle that goes from your almost your earlobe to your clavicle, and trying to figure out like how much I want that to show through the gullet that he's got going on. Trying to bring in some bulk, then I bring in too much bulk and I have to back it up. Again, the latissimus dorsi, and then the spinous erectus. Trying to pull those muscles into it in a very exaggerated way. And here you can see I'm using the trim dynamic tool to sort of file everything down. If anything, I do tend to use the clay buildup tool a little bit too extreme sometimes, that it bulks it up way too quickly. Now one thing here is that sometimes I use the dam standard tool to create these sort of divots, but they don't create it quite sharp enough. They create a divot that's sort of equidistant on both sides. And sometimes that's fine, sometimes that's what I want, but in the case of where the stomach is hanging over the iliac crest, I wanted sort of a lopsided crevasse. So what I did is I masked it and then just used the move tool to pull the gut over it, and it created a little bit more realistic fold. Now here I'm still not happy with the positioning of the legs, and I'm trying to figure this out. And like I said, I wish I could say I had a bigger plan and that I knew what I was doing, but I'm really just kind of intuiting what I want to work. So getting those legs a little bit more bow-legged. I'm kind of, in my mind, I didn't actually pull up a reference for this, but I'm kind of using the body type that they use with Shrek as sort of a jumping off point. Now obviously he's a little bit more of a cartoon character, whereas I'm trying to get some element of realism in this guy. So I'm trying to figure out how these legs would like support his bulk. I think at this point I realized that they're a little bit too bent. I think it's a little bit too much Shrek in here right now. Because if your knees were that bent, I think it would, well, it'd really tire out your knees for sure, and he would have a little bit more muscle bulk then. So I keep on doing a profile to kind of see, like, are they looking right to me? No, they're not. Here I'm trying to straighten it out by just carving away. And really what I should have done is just use the gizmo because it would have been easier, but sometimes I get a little pig-headed when I'm working. There's a small jump right here. You can see that I've straightened out the legs a little bit more and that the feet are flatter. And finally I'm starting to tackle those forearms. Forearms are probably my least favorite area to sculpt because there is so much going on with those muscles, especially with the radius and the ulna. And so I was putting it off. I'm trying to give him sort of Popeye arms where he's got the really big forearms. Again, with that whole idea of like grabbing his prey with these sort of goofy looking hands. After the face, I think that the hands are probably my most favorite area to sculpt. It's an area I feel a little bit more comfortable with. I've had to sculpt plenty of hands. And even when I was in undergrad at UW-Madison, I did an entire flip book of my hand opening and closing. So it gave me really good knowledge of the hand anatomy and you know, the science of looking, I guess. So I feel a little bit more confident in my hand anatomy than I do in, say, my forearm or lower leg anatomy. So I want his fingers to be a little bit bulky. I'm just using the clay buildup tool to kind of lay in some knuckles and figure out how things are working. Now the clay buildup tool does tend to, you have to be a little bit careful with it on these type of forms that it's not going to flatten it, because the way it, I don't know exactly how to explain it, just the way it works. If you have it too big of a brush for the area, it's going to try and flatten the sculpture. So sometimes I have to oscillate between that and the inflate tool, and in this case the move tool. So I'm just trying to move up that webbing and get the fingers a little bit fatter. He's got nice fat pads on his fingers. And just the damp standard to create some the grooves between the joints. And now I'm just trying to put in some fingernails. It's not really a necessary detail at this point, and I might actually lose it in the remeshing, but I'm going to just try and do some quick, not perfect, but and I'm just using like a mask tool to move out a nail and then punch down where the cuticle is. It's sort of a quick and dirty way of going about it. And some of these nails are a little bit too big, so I'm just masking down. And then I'm just sort of bulking up around the cuticle area. Again, it's a quick and dirty way. It's not really meant for a close inspection, and I'm certainly, if I do decide to work back into this piece, I'm going to have to finesse that a little bit more. Again, just playing with the muscles here. That's the tricep. You can see that it's got the 3 insertion points. And figuring out the arm bulk. Now, one thing I've found is that when I'm doing ZBrush, if I'm not careful, I tend to linger in one point of view for too long, which is why I'm constantly rotating my model. Because if I linger too long, it's going to end up looking really goofy, because it'll look great from one perspective, but the second you turn it, it's going to be like really misshapen and lumpy. So I'm trying to always turn my tool to get a feel for how it's looking. Again, just using the damp standard to pop in some detail. Trying to clean up the tricep a little bit. It's got a good insertion point. And then the bicep. And that sort of weird dimple in the elbow. There, he's starting to look a little bit more believable. He's still a little bit comical and a little bit pushed in a sort of silly direction. He is a sillier character. But one thing I would like to do is to see if I can work back into him later and maybe make him a scary version too. So maybe if you happened upon this guy in the woods and he didn't see you, he'd be kind of silly looking, but the second he sees you, it's terrifying. I don't know, I'm just kind of playing with the story in my head. And using the clay buildup tool to sort of finesse the leg muscles again. His calves kind of run into his ankle. Like normally that ankle area would be a little bit thinner. But I'm just, again, pushing and pulling until it looks right. And I do have an anatomy book open next to me, and just trying to get a feel for things. Now it's about this time when I realize like I really need to do some toes. So again, not the best way but I'm just cutting out some stuff and then cutting away, deleting the hidden parts to create a gap, and then just using the move tool to push it back. This is not the best way to do this, I can assure you. But sometimes it's, I don't know. Like I said, I get a little bit pig-headed sometimes, and just like I've gone this far, I'm gonna keep going. So now I'm just pulling and pushing. I want him to have big feet to support his weight. I think his toes are kind of funny looking. Just really basically roughing in the foot. Like this is pretty much in the ugly stage right now. Just trying to get a feel for things and get it in the right spot. Using the clay buildup to sort of add some joints. I like how if you're standing and you kind of press your toes against the ground, I like that look, and I think that that's appropriate for this character, especially with his bulk. Like because his knees are bent, his toes would be holding some of his weight, so there would be some tension between his toes and the floor. So I'm trying to create that tension by making it look like the knuckles are pressing down. And then just lots of little moves, reestablishing those joints. Seeing how they look. It's just like a regular sculpture. You kind of have to back up every now and then to make sure everything looks right in proportion with everything else. Now, fortunately, it's a little bit easier to fix if you notice that it's not in proportion. You can always use the scale tool or something to just sort of size it up. Eventually, I pictured this guy being covered in sort of a shaggy hair, which is why I'm not really worried about the genitalia or even like the feet. Like I hope the feet are kind of furry, hobbit feet. I know you're not going to see the bottoms of the feet, but I want it to at least look a little bit realistic. So I'm kind of just putting in some anatomy of the balls of the feet. And then the arch. Making sure that he's got some weight at the bottom of the heel, the back of the heel. So if you actually look at your foot, the heel does, I think there's this tendency, at least I know I have it, where I want to keep the ankle going straight down, but your heel actually pushes out a little bit to create that stability. I decided that his arch is a little bit too high. Now this is my quick and dirty cheat for creating flat feet. I'm just going at the side, cutting away, and then filling in some of the areas where I think that it needs to have a little bit more contact with the floor. And doing it again. And I'm just doing the delete hidden and close holes. But that gets some feet that are fairly well touching the ground. I'm still going to play with them some more, but... And like I said, like the heels, like they're actually a little bit more towards the back. Bulking up the toes a little bit more. Trying to create that tension with the ground. That it looks like his toes are pressing into the ground. Trying to figure out how big I want that big toe, because at a certain point it just becomes comically large, and try not to get quite there. And since I did quick and dirty fingernails, I'm going to do some quick and dirty toenails. Just using a mask and the move tool. If I take this further along, like say I break it down, I'm probably going to have to add in separate subtools for the nails But for right now, they're fine. Still think that that neck has too many gaps in it, so I'm trying to smooth some things out. I tend to, I notice, leave big gaps in things that's not really what I'm looking for. There you go. I'm happy with it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remesh them. So I'm just using, in this case, the Z-remesher with the topography tool, where I'm kind of trying to say, hey, this is how I want the topography to go. It's not great. And I'm really only using it on the face. And again, this is sort of a quick and dirty method, not like what I would be doing with the Dragar, where I'm actually going through and trying to make clean topology. So there's my Z-remeshed topology. It's not perfect by any stretch. And it still, you can see, has some of the groups. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to project my sculpt onto that Z-remesh topology. And then I'm just going to start sculpting back in some more details on a lower subdivision level. And since I can't help myself, I got to get in there and start tweaking the eyes again. And you can see that the topology is not perfect. It's a little bit messy, a little bit janky. Let's get a little. So what I'm doing here is I'm just masking off an area and then dividing the topology so it's creating smaller topology around the eyes, so that when I divide it down, it's going to be even tighter. And it allows me to get a little bit cleaner of lines here. That's not perfect. It's not a perfect method. But since this is just a sketch, it's good enough for now. This is one of those, I might tweak it later, but just trying to get in some rough stuff. A little bit of a tear duct there. I don't have the mesh fine enough, because right now I believe, let's see, it looks like I've got about 14,000 polys. And I know that my computer, like I said, it's an older computer, so if I divide again, it's gonna be very unhappy with me and likely crash. So I'm trying to just work with the topology that I have for the time being, and then eventually I'll try to work in some more details at a higher topology with a lot of breaks to save in between. And I can't really record the videos then because it eats up too much memory. But if I were going to take it further, that's what I would do. Again, just trying to pull in some definition to that jaw, because if he's eating bones and humans, he's going to have some bite force. And then this is just one of my favorite things. It's called the sagittal crest. It's associated with bite force. So I'm trying to create a little bit of a bony ridge there to show where the edge of the skull would be. And then the actual sagittal crest is right there. And I'm sort of thinking about the skull anatomy underneath. Adding some wrinkles, playing with the anatomy on the ears. This is just a sketch, so I'm working on the stuff that I like. And there you have it. Now this is not a finished piece, it's just a sketch. But it gives a good idea of a character and where I can go from here. So I might take him a little bit further later. I'd like to. We'll see. But thank you very much for watching and for tuning in and for all of your support on Patreon. I couldn't do it without you all. So thank you.